so-called knowledge economy, learning society, and now the skills agenda. This certainly places a great deal of emphasis on education policy and on formal education institutions like schools and universities and TAFEs. But at the same time, it indicates an importance that's placed on education and learning more broadly in society. And it was this that really sparked my interest in my paper, The Limits of Learning. In this paper, I wanted to explore and understand the ways in which education and learning is picked up and expressed in policy portfolios outside of education, and most particularly in policy agenda that has as its focus the most disadvantaged and excluded in society. So I took as my focus the Road Home, which is the most substantial policy initiative around homelessness in Australia for about 25 years. It was instigated in 2008 by the then Labor government. And homelessness is certainly a really significant and persistent social issue in Australia. The most recent data indicates that there's over 100,000 people who are homeless on any given night, and this is a number that's on the increase. So in my analysis of the Road Home and other related policy documentation, it was certainly clear that education and learning was represented and understood as a very powerful and important response to homelessness. Throughout the policy documentation, examples of people successfully engaging in education and training are used to mark social success, to mark pathways out of homelessness, and also to mark aspirations to socially mobile futures. Now, this may seem a fairly common sense and perhaps unsurprising inclusion in homelessness policy, particularly in the context of the knowledge economy and learning society. However, in my analysis, I think the inclusion of education and learning here raises some questions and perhaps even some tensions about the ways in which education is understood in the policy field. Educational theorist Basil Bernstein talks about the totally pedagogized society in which we have to be constantly open to transforming ourselves across our life course. And a key part of this is trainability, the idea that we need to be always developing skills and dispositions so that we're employable in what is a constantly shifting, insecure, and increasingly risky labour market. Now, this has really stark repercussions for people who are most disadvantaged and excluded in our society. It may be that in a policy like the Road Home that we're asking people to participate in education and training whilst the broader structural inequalities that underpin the experience of homelessness get left aside. What also gets left aside is a broader conceptualisation or perhaps even an exploration of the sorts of educational practices that might challenge these structural inequalities, rather than simply attempting to give people what are arguably quite weak toolkits in which to navigate the existing structural inequalities. So in my paper, The Limits of Learning, I guess I offer a provocation to rethink the ways in which education and learning is picked up in other policy portfolios, and to think about the ways in which education and learning might actually have limitations in the response to really deep and persistent structural inequalities in society like homelessness.